Stargate Voyager.
Well, I am excited to be joined by Andrew Collins today, author of Karahan Tepe, Civilization of the Anunnaki and the Cosmic Origins of the Serpent of Eden. What a title, Andrew. How are you doing, man?
I'm fine, yes. The publisher seems to like very long titles. It's something to do with meta tags, but I think it's overly long, really. But I understand why they're doing it. So, yeah, I'm good. Obviously, we've got lots to talk about. Karahan at the forefront, of course.
Yeah, no, I love the title. Man, it's action-packed. So many keywords that catch your attention. And, of course, it's great to be joined by another bald guy wearing all black. I like this.
Yes. At least we match each other's attire and appearance. So that's a good start.
So let's start out by talking about your 20-year quest to understand the mysteries of Karahan Tepe, which is Göbekli Tepe's sister site. Kind of break that down for us. 20 years. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for me, it really begins in the mid-1990s when I was writing a book that would be published under the name From the Ashes of Angels. Now, what this did was to look at all of the myths and legends relating to these mythical beings that were said to have given humanity the rudiments of civilization. In Hebrew myth, you have the Watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. They were said to have taken mortal wives who gave birth to these giant babies, Nephilim, but they also revealed to them the arts and sciences of heaven, and all those arts and sciences are the rudiments of what we would call civilization. Then, obviously, in Mesopotamian law, you had the so-called Anunnaki. They were the mythical beings that, again, were said to have given humanity the gift of civilization. They were said to have given us sheep and grain, for instance, which is obviously a metaphor for animal husbandry and agriculture. They were said to have, helped us to create the first irrigation ditches, the first cities. So, they're in the same role as the Watchers in Hebrew myth. So I wonder whether you were talking about the same beings, basically, but just coming at it from different perspectives. There are similar beings in Iranian myth called the Immortals. They were said to be the semi-divine beings that would give birth to the royal dynasties of Iran, for instance. Another similar thing. Armenian myth has got similar characters as well. And what I was able to do is to pinpoint all of this activity down to a geographical location. And that is what we would today call southeastern and eastern Anatolia, or modern day Turkey. And I predicted that in this area, you would find the elements of some kind of high culture created by an incoming shamanic elite, possibly bird shamans, because it seems to be a lot of evidence that they wore cloaks of feathers, according to the stories, particularly to do with the Watchers, and that they were birdmen or eagles, or they could fly through the air, which all sounded very much like shamans to me. And that basically what they did was they kick-started the Neolithic Revolution, or in this cradle of civilization, which in biblical terms is remembered under the name the Garden of Eden. Now, this is a geographical place. It's mentioned in the Bible, in the same way as it mentions other geographical locations. And Eden is said to be where the four rivers of paradise take their rise. And those four rivers can very easily be identified as the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Arxis, which flows east into the Caspian Sea, and the Great Azab River, which is a big river of its own, but it eventually will flow into the Tigris when it reaches Iraq. And all of these rise in eastern Turkey, all of them. So if they are the four rivers of paradise, then this gives us a geographical location to look for all of this stuff, not just obviously the Garden of Eden, the stories of Adam and Eve, which we'll come on to, and the Serpent of Eden, but also obviously all of the events that took place prior to Abraham, who lived in this area. He was a resident of Şanlıurfa, which is only about 10 miles away from Göbekli Tepe. And according to the story, God contacted him and said, you've got to now move into the promised land, that will be inherited by your descendants, go off there now. So he travels off to a place called Haran, which is about 45 minutes drive away from Şanlıurfa towards the south. It's very close to the border with Syria. Once you cross over to Syria, there's a clear route that takes you all the way to Euphrates, over that, and eventually you'll come to where Abraham rested, which was a place called Shechem, modern day Nablus in the West Bank, beneath a mountain called Mount Gerizim, which was the original mountain of God. And here God appears to him again and said, build the first altar. And this is where he sets up. But we're getting slightly off cue here, because all of the events before Abraham in the book of Genesis are all played out in the area of either southeastern Turkey or northern Syria, just over the border. So this is the right area. Now, all of this I put in this book, From the Ashes of Angels. It came out in 1996. It was a Times bestseller. What I didn't know at the time, as I was writing this, was in the very dark nights of 1995, is that during the day, the first spades were going in the ground at Göbekli Tepe, somewhere I had no knowledge about whatsoever. Obviously, I touched upon the early Neolithic culture of the region. A lot of firsts for humanity are definitely known to have occurred in that area. The agriculture, animal husbandry, the earliest metalwork, possibly the earliest beer, wine, various other firsts for humanity. The first built structures, some of the first ceramic idols, and all sorts of things like this. I mean, I put this in the book as sort of evidence that something big was happening in this area. But as I said, I didn't know anything about Göbekli Tepe, and would not do until the year 2000, when there was a huge spread in a German magazine. And I looked at that and I thought, well, there you go. There's your smoking gun, basically, of this incoming shamanic elite, which I felt came from somewhere else in the ancient world. We'll come on to that. And of course, my interests were focused on that thereon. But in 2002, my book, From the Ashes of Angels, was published in the Turkish language edition. And 2 years later, I was invited out to this area, to Diyarbakir, which is the administrative centre of southeastern Turkey, as part of this cultural festival. I talked all about this, this area being the Garden of Eden, the cradle of civilization, etc. And I was given a driver and an interpreter for a week to go around a lot of the sites that I'd been writing about. And whilst I was in the area, I got to hear about this new site that had been discovered called Karahan Tepe. And I saw a picture of a T-shaped pillar, very much like the ones that were being found in there, dozens at Göbekli Tepe. But this was clearly nothing to do with Göbekli Tepe. This was another site altogether. So I thought, I need to find this site. So a couple of days later, we were in the Tek Mountains, which is where it was supposedly located, just going around trying to find it, asking people. Nobody seemed to know where the hell it was at all. But then finally, just as my driver and interpreter were about to give up, we talked to this guy on a tractor, full Arab dress, because remember, you're very close to the Syrian border here. And he just pointed in a certain direction, and we came to this farmhouse, and a little lad came out, and he spoke to our interpreter, and he pointed to a hill to the south. And I realised that this was Karahan Tepe. And as you walked towards it, you could start seeing stone tools, just a few of them here and there. But the closer you got to this hill, the more and more they became, until at its base there were hundreds, if not thousands, of these stone tools everywhere. What you also had was these limestone angled fragments of what they call porthole stones. And these are probably entrances into now lost enclosures, either from the side or above. Plus, you could see sticking out of the hard earth and rubble that was at the base of the hill and on the side of the hill, these the tops of these T-shaped pillars, well worn because clearly they'd been exposed for 10, 11,000 years. But it was quite obvious that something big was going on here, and that, underneath this soil somewhere was another Göbekli Tepe, a sister site of Göbekli Tepe, as I started to refer to it. So I would continually go back to this site, on many, many occasions, often with my colleague Hugh Newman and his partner JJ Ainsworth, and we explored every single hill, every single cave, every single valley, looking for evidence of human activity, which I eventually ended up writing articles about. But then in 2018, when we were there, we heard that they were about to do a survey of the site in preparation for excavations that would begin the following year, 2019. And then everything went quiet. I didn't go back there in 2019. And then, of course, we had all the lockdowns and, didn't hear anything at all, really. And then towards the end of 2021, finally, they revealed what they'd uncovered at Karahan Tepe. And it was quite literally what I now refer to as a lost city of the Anunnaki. I mean, it is extraordinary. It's at least 11,000 years old. There are at least 20 different enclosures, most of them relatively small, but some of them large, and 3 of them are cut directly out of the bedrock itself, in what can only be described as the earliest rock architecture anywhere in the world. And I mean, one of them, for instance, is this structure that is dropped vertically downwards from the level rock surface, and it has 10 pillars that are been left in place, as they've cut down. So they're 10 almost phallic looking pillars, with an 11th one that they brought in that looks a bit serpent like. And on the wall facing into the hill, there's this huge human head that's 3 times the size of a normal human head, and it's on the end of a long serpentine neck with like these striations going across it. I mean, it looks like something out of a Beetlejuice film, to be honest. I mean, honestly, that's the only similarity that you could give it. And you start looking at these and you just think, what the hell is going on here? Well, I mean, a couple of things immediately became apparent. Firstly, that there were alignments towards the solstices here. One I discovered myself in connection with something called the pit shrine, which is next to this other shrine, which we call the pillar shrine. And this pit shrine has got this deep hole in the center of it. I mean, it drops down about 8 or 9 feet, and there's no obvious way of access into it, and it's a mystery as to exactly what it represents. But this is aligned towards the summer solstice sunset. Okay, now I'll come back to that in a minute. But in the pillar shrine itself, Hugh and JJ discovered, they went there on the winter solstice in 2021, and what they found was that a beam of light, of sunlight, just after sunrise penetrates through a little porthole window and hits this giant head, and only the giant head. And ultimately this is arguably the earliest of this type of solar alignment anywhere in the world. And obviously this is something that he's written about extensively. The whole story is in my book, and he and JJ have actually done an appendix type telling the whole story in my book Karahan Tepe. So the whole story is in there. All of this is in there, obviously. And so you had this. So we know that these rock cut structures, of which there are 3, seem to be aligned towards the solstices. They were locked in to the solstices. But in addition to that, firstly, a couple of years ago, we were in Turkey, and we take tours out there twice a year. And we were looking at a picture of when I say we, I mean me and the tour guests in an evening, at an overhead picture of the pillar shrine. And there's like this deeply carved groove behind it that almost looks like a sort of neck or body of something coming off of it. And one lady said, "Oh, do you think this could represent a human sperm?" And I thought about it for a moment, And I said, no, it can't be. I said, because, these people didn't have microscopes. But then as it sort of sunk in, I thought, wait a minute, hold on. What if it's not a sperm? What if it's an actual snake, a snake head? So I overlaid a indigenous state to that region, to the Tepe Mountains, which is the Anatolian meadow viper, which at that time I had no confirmation that the people at Karahan even knew, but now I know that they were using it in their rituals, and it fits perfectly. And in other words, the pillar shrine is a perfect 3D representation of a snake's head, and this is 11,000 years old. And the actual pillars that are sticking up out of the ground, in abstract form, they could easily be seen as the fangs, actually of the snake itself.
Oh, wow.
I know. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, the other shrine next to it, the pit shrine. Sorry, we've given them names that are so similar. Is also in the shape of a snake, but a slightly different, form of it. So, what's this thing with the snake? I mean, we know that the first pillar that I saw, it had a snake crawling up the side. There are snakes all over the place at Karahan Tepe. That they're on the ground as you look down. They're on the side of benches. They're crawling up the sides of pillars. So why is the snake so important? Well, what I came to the conclusion initially was that they seem to be venerating some kind of cosmic snake, in other words, some kind of deity or entity that took the form of a snake. And I imagined the fact that maybe they were going into altered states of consciousness and channeling this serpentine energy through them, in very much the similar way to the oracle at Delphi, which is a similar thing. Let me explain. Because at Delphi, what you have is a Pythia, a priestess who would sit on a tripod-shaped seat over a fissure in the rock where fumes would come up and intoxicate her. And these fumes were coming from the dead body of a serpent called Python, if I remember rightly. And she would go into an altered state, and Apollo, who the temple is dedicated to, would speak through her. In other words, possess her, and she would speak as Apollo and give pronouncements that could decide the fate and destiny of kings, of kingdoms, and even the gods themselves. But what's so interesting is that the form of Apollo that enters inside the Pythia is not some kind of glowing sun god, as you might expect with Apollo. It's a snake. It was Apollo in the form of a snake. You can see this from the various vases that show the oracle, from the Greek period. And if you look into how Apollo appears to people, which is what I did for the book, when it's in terms of oracular, it's in the form of a snake. It can come in the form of, somebody can have a dream or a vision or whatever, and the snake will herald the appearance and the presence of Apollo himself. Now, what I imagined is that something similar was going on at Karahan Tepe. But then the question becomes, what is this snake? Is it just some kind of conceptual, deity? Or does it have some more grounding in reality? And the answer came from the pit shrine, which is orientated towards the summer solstice sunset. Because if you wait for 2 hours until it gets dark, you see an incredible sight in front of you. Because at the exact position that the sun has just set, you see the Milky Way going vertically upwards into the sky with this whole dark area in the middle, which is called the Dark Rift or the Great Rift or the Cygnus Rift. And right at the base, just setting at this point, is what's known as the Galactic bulge. This is the center. This marks the center of our own Milky Way galaxy. So if you imagine the Milky Way as a huge band or ring that encircles our world,
Wow, so much to unpack. I'm absolutely fascinated by the giant serpentine head you referenced at Karahan Tepe, how it just juts out of that enclosure. Like you said, it's got the neck, serpentine features. It's a couple times bigger than a normal size head, like you mentioned. And then there's the giant statue that was unearthed just a couple years ago. It's like 7 feet tall, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the latest big discovery. I mean, stuff's being discovered all the time, but it's such an extraordinary discovery, because this is a big enclosure, could be as much as 100 feet across, discovered right on the top of the hill. So clearly it was an important position. It's thought to date probably to about 9000 BC, and it's got your T-pillars in it. There's two right at the front with a bench, which is quite clearly an altar area where they found various stone plates. They found this beautiful 2 feet tall vulture that was standing right by the side of the altar, facing into the enclosure. And then just to the right of the vulture was, as you said, this huge giant statue. And I mean, we can only but call it a giant. It's 7.5 feet tall, and that's sitting down. So, you know, in other words, it's sort of like that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it on the screen, but and if it stood up, there's no question it would have been 9 feet tall. And it's got this huge head again, similar to the one on the lower level, but this one's much more anatomically perfect. In other words, it looks more, human-like. It's even got ears with holes drilled in it that would have taken earrings. So, it seems that it had earrings in the past. You can see its ribs; they're anatomically correct. He's got this weird mullet haircut, and he's got his hands on his private parts, which has obviously been the subject of much debate, obviously. And he's big. I mean, so what does he represent? And I think the archaeologists have said, well, clearly he could be an ancestor, part of an ancestral line, and whatever. Maybe the phallic nature is to show, the growth, through these lines, whatever. In other words, this is some kind of clan totem or tribal totem. That's possible. I have no problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is its size, because if it's so big, why is it so big? Why does it need to be that size? Now, we know that in ancient Egypt, for instance, there was a massive dimorphism between, the kings, for instance, and the wives and the princesses, would be this size, and the king would be that size, or whatever. I mean, okay, and quite clearly that the kings were not giants, or not all of them anyway. One of them was, though. But I think what we got here at Karahan is something more, because remember all of these stories which I started this with, the Watchers and the Nephilim. These were said to be of enormous size. The Nephilim were of incredible size, and the Watchers themselves were said to be as tall as trees. So that definitely suggests that they were oversized individuals. The Anunnaki are not described as giants, not as far as I'm aware. They're described as looking very odd, with very strange radiant eyes and possibly serpentine-like faces. But I don't think they're described as giants. But I think that we are looking at a figure here that is considered to be a divine ancestor, very much like the largest of the T pillars at other places like Göbekli Tepe, which can be up to 18 feet tall. The ones in enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe, and that this is some memory of people who were of large size. So, who might they have been? Well, I think then we have to start looking at who could have been this shamanic elite, these prime movers behind this post-Ice Age civilization, which the archaeologists want to refer to under the name Taş Tepeler, which means the stony hills or the stony mounds. The stone because they worked in stone, and the hills because of the occupational mounds that they create, like layer cakes of human activity, which you pick apart to find all of these beautiful enclosures. And they want to see this as the Taş Tepeler culture. So who were they? Well, firstly, I think that there were several different populations or factions or human groups involved. I think you have indigenous peoples who were clearly in southeastern Turkey at this time. You probably had people in the mountains to the east, these Zagros mountains, who were the Zazian peoples. They almost certainly came down and were part of it. They were quite advanced. You probably had peoples coming in from the Aegean area and Western Turkey, who we know were incredibly advanced because they were creating seafaring vessels that were going across to Cyprus on a regular basis as early as 11,000 BC. So we know that they were advanced, and the chances are they were also coming into southeastern Turkey to help things along. But on top of this, I think that you have this elite group that are the ones that come in and create the whole culture in the first place. And these people, I am pretty certain, come from the north or the east, but their journey starts, I think, as far east as Siberia and Mongolia, In other words, the other side of the Ural Mountains that divide Europe with Asia. And the reason I say that is because of something I noticed a while ago, and archaeologists have also started catching up on this, is that the style of stone tools that are found in association with Taş Tepeler and the proto-Taş Tepeler sites, which are much further east on the river Tigris near Lake Van, which is this huge inland sea, are stone tools that begin their evolution in Siberia and Mongolia as early as 30,000 years ago, and have been gradually coming into the region in waves, almost like a tide of a sea, gradually making their way into southwestern Asia, and then obviously ending up eventually in Anatolia. And these are very specific types of tools. You know, they're done in a style known as pressure flaking, which is something that you can't just watch somebody else doing and just copy it. It's a trade that's passed on, you know, from teacher to pupil, and you have to learn this skill. It's not something, you know, you can pick up overnight. And this becomes like a sort of paper trail, if you like, of the origins of the people of Anatolia behind Taş Tepeler, and you can trace it all the way back into Mongolia, certain sites to the south of Lake Baikal, or to the Denisovan cave, which is where we have evidence of this ancient humans known as the Denisovans. And they were incredibly intelligent, incredibly advanced. I mean, for instance, as early as 45 to 50,000 years ago, they were producing beautiful jewelry. Just look up the Denisovan bracelet, which is this greenstone bangle that's beautifully done. I mean, it could have been done, you know, in the last few hundred years, and it's got a drill hole through it that's been examined by scientists that have concluded, and this is in their paper, that it has a feed rate that's as fast as any modern day drill. Now, how the hell did they do this? I mean, we're not saying they had modern day drills, of course not, but somehow they found a way of penetrating, you know, stone very, very fast. They created the first bone needles, for instance, which they were making tailored clothing, the earliest in the world. They were possibly even riding horses. The evidence of DNA of horses found in the Denisovan cave has suggested that they domesticated and possibly even rode horses. They created the earliest musical instruments. And there are various... also, almost certainly, they were the first people that started looking at the movement of the sun and the moon and started recording it in terms of numeric, certain key numbers, because this crops up on one particular item that comes from the Denisovan cave, which is this ivory cave lion. I think it's a mammoth ivory cave lion, which has got a very specific sequence of notches on both sides of it that show an interest in both the sun and the moon and its movements.
And Andrew, in that cave that you're referencing in Siberia, wasn't there a massive tooth molar that was discovered that you would, if you look at the size of the tooth and the body that would be in it, it would be a giant entity, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we haven't got much anatomical remains of the Denisovans, but what we have got all suggests that they were of extreme size, possibly comparable to the largest WWE wrestlers or American footballers. And these are terms that the paleogeneticists are actually using to describe them. I mean, I've noted them and I've used these terms in the book to show, you know, this is not me saying this. This is these scientists that are actually saying it. And what's so interesting is that just today, I noticed that there is a news story that came out a couple of days ago, which I missed, about the Chinese have now decided that they have discovered a brand new hominin or human type, which is, and I can't quote exactly what it is, but I think they're calling it Homo Julianus or words like that, which means the big-headed people. Okay, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And it's quite clear that all of the different craniums or parts of craniums that they're using to define this new type of hominin includes those that have been found, the teeth of you're describing in the Denisova cave, a jawbone that was found on the Tibetan plateau at a place called Zahe, and also a jawbone that was found off of the coast of Taiwan, as well as a couple of other jawbones and skulls that they found, not skulls, not jawbones, skulls that they've actually found in China itself. So basically, they have named, scientifically, the Denisovans at last. Now, some of their contemporaries in the West are clearly not accepting this at the moment, and I mean they're aligning it with the largest skull ever studied by science to date. I mean, officially this is, and that's the so-called Dragon Man skull that was found in Harbin in northern China in the 1930s, and that was then hidden away, but only resurfaced in the past few years and has been verified by Chinese scientists. And they call that Homo longi, which means basically Dragon Man, the Dragon Man. And this is the reason that they call it that is because there's a river where it was actually found. It was found by a Chinese worker who was being essentially forced to work on a bridge over the river there. I can't remember what it's called now at the moment, but it basically means there's something dragon, basically. And as they were putting the pylons in for it, they found this skull, and so as it wasn't confiscated by the Japanese, it was hidden away. But the guy essentially just left it where it was, and virtually until his deathbed, and revealed it, I think, to his grandson or something. And they went and found it was inside a well, and it was then presented to science. So in other words, not only have you got the largest human skull in the Dragon Man skull, but you've now got the Chinese officially naming the Denisovans and calling them the big-headed people. I mean, not the small-headed people, the big-headed people. And the reason being is that the size of their craniums was anything up to 1,800 cubic centimeters, which, I mean, I was only reading this earlier on today, and I mean, I've got to do a video myself about it. I mean, that's big. That's very, very big. Wow. Yeah, Andrew, which means that they had an incredible brain.
Yeah, is the word Denisovans, is that like a more academic way of possibly saying descendants of the Nephilim?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, you got to be careful when you talk about Nephilim, because that's purely Hebrew myth and legend. It doesn't come from any other tradition around the world. So, that's focused through the Hebrew lens, if you like. Whereas quite clearly in other parts of the world, even in Mesopotamia, the names are always going to be different. And as I said, we've got Anunnaki, we can talk about them. And you've got others. I mean, the immortals, for instance, of Iran were said to be of extreme size as well. In Armenia, you have basically a race of giants who are behind the ruling dynasties of Armenia. You have similar ideas all the way throughout Southwest Asia, really. And as I said, it's through the Hebrew or biblical perspective that we have terms like the Watchers and the Nephilim. So, we should always remember that name doesn't crop up in any other part of the world. But yeah, I mean, we are talking about the descendants. I mean, what I think happened was that our early ancestors met the Denisovans in places like Siberia, Mongolia, probably the Tibetan plateau, obviously China as well. They interbred with them. The Denisovans then died off, but we carried their legacy forward, because not only did we have their genes in us now, but we also had their knowledge, because quite clearly, you'd have had a son, let's say, being born, or a daughter of a Denisovan father and a human female, or the other way round. So we would have been the ones with that legacy and carrying it forward, the knowledge, the technology, the innovation, the mindset. And I think it's that that's being carried gradually into Southwest Asia and Anatolia. I think that's the way round it works. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't forget the Neanderthals as well. I mean, they were mostly on the western side of the Eurasian continent, but they also went up to the area of Siberia, and they also interbred with the Denisovans, just as we did. And in fact, you know, back, let's say 50,000 years ago, it would have been like a scene out of Lord of the Rings, to be honest. You'd have had the big guys, which had been the Denisovans. You'd have had the small guys, which would have been the Neanderthals. You'd have had us somewhere in the middle. And then you'd have had the hobbits, you know, the Homo floresiensis, the people who they found evidence of their remains on Flores in Indonesia, who were probably an offshoot of Homo erectus, who were also still around in some form, no doubt. And so, you know, you'd have had all of these different so-called hominids around at this time, contributing to this technology and innovation that's eventually being carried forward into the time of the genesis of civilization. But of course, there are things that get in the way, like the Younger Dryas event. The Younger Dryas event is a 1200-year mini ice age that affected the whole of the northern hemisphere, that created severe cold climates, and pushed obviously a lot of people southwards at this time. It came to an end in 9600 BC, which is the exact date of Göbekli Tepe, and almost certainly Karahan as well. But it began in 10,800 BC, when we are now pretty certain there was a catastrophe, a cosmic event involving the fragmentation of a part of a comet that probably came around the sun, came towards the Earth, broke up, entered our atmosphere, broke into literally thousands of pieces that very quickly hit the Earth. But as they did so, they exploded in what are known as air blasts, devastating huge swathes of biomass in the Northern Hemisphere, from North America all the way across Europe to the Middle East. In fact, one of the impacts, they are pretty certain, took place at a site called Abu Huraya on the Euphrates, which is only about 150 miles from Göbekli Tepe. Now, as I say, this was 10,800 BC, but other terrible events were going on probably for hundreds of years afterwards. You know, more cosmic events. We know that there was a period of darkness. We know that there were mass floods, tsunamis, all the rest of it. This would have been a terrible time to live. And almost certainly quite a large percentage of humanity was wiped out as well. And of course, this is something that myself, my colleagues, you know, particularly Graham Hancock, have written about in our books for decades now. I mean, I first talked about this in From the Ashes of Angels. I brought the whole thing together about the Younger Dryas impact being a comet in a book called Gateway to Atlantis in the year 2000. And, you know, now it's big business. You know, the idea that there was this comet impact and that it triggered this mini ice age is something that's very well established. I mean, yes, of course, it's got its detractors, but I think that there is overwhelming evidence that it did take place. And whether you believe in that or not, the Younger Dryas itself had a huge impact upon humanity, not just through migrations, because people would have been trying to move south all the time, you know, because, you know, the further south you could go, clearly the temperature would get better and better. But, I mean, obviously displacement. We also know that this was the end of the megafauna, you know, the animals that had been roaming the land throughout the so-called Pleistocene age, geological age. And all those were now gone. Saber-toothed tigers, giant camels, giant sloths, all sorts of mastodons, all these sort of things, all disappeared virtually overnight. And humans as well. I mean, in America alone, it's suggested that up to 75% of the Clovis population just vanished overnight, and those that were left were only around for a very short time afterwards, and were replaced by other cultures that clearly probably moved up from the south to take their place. So it's a very traumatic time. So you've also got to put this into perspective of what was going on at places like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. What impact did this event have on their mindset? And there is a very famous visionary writer by the name of Barbara Hand Clough. And she wrote a book called Catastrophe, which was basically about the aftermath of this cosmic event. And basically what she said, and as the title suggests, is that there would have been this state of mind, this catastrophe, this fear of further catastrophes taking place, and that there would have been no psychoanalysts back then. But what you did have is the shamans, the priests, and you could go to them and say, look, we get scared every time a comet comes into the sky. What can you do about it? And I think this is where this shamanic elite, these prime movers behind Taş Tepeler, came in and stole the show, basically. Because I think what they did was they came in and said, look, we can sort it all out. We have the knowledge of the sky. We can, we can communicate with the supernatural creatures, the tricksters that cause these type of cataclysms. So help us build these enclosures, which we will tell you exactly how we want them built, with these T-shaped pillars, with these animals, with, in certain directions. They've got to be aligned to stars, blah, blah, blah. And everything will be okay. And that's exactly what people did for 1,500 years. And I mean, you think about that. I mean, they were building these T-shaped structures for 1,500 years. That's the equivalent of us building churches. The earliest churches in the modern style probably go back to 500-600 AD, the basilicas in Rome, whatever. And we're still doing it now. We're still putting crosses on altars in the east. Why in the east? Because it's the direction of heaven. I mean, why do we do that? Why don't we, put them in the opposite direction and have a 5-pointed star instead of a cross? And the answer is clear, because we fear bad things would happen if we did do that. And I think that this is the same with the T-shaped structures, which we're finding all over the place. I mean, it's not just Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. There's new sites that are being opened. Sefer Tepe, Sayburge, which is just a few miles to the west of Şanlıurfa. I mean, you look at them and there's T-shaped pillars everywhere. I mean, why do you need to do this? What was their obsession with creating structures with all these T-pillars? And the answer, when I look at them, always comes back. They felt they needed to do it, and if they didn't do it, something bad would happen. And I mean, I think what's important here is that the people that were creating these enclosures are classified as hunter-gatherers. Now, these are the sort of people that, in theory, all they needed to do was, hunt animals. They got their family, supply it to them, look after them, probably go on circular routes that would probably take maybe 4 years, 5 years to go around, following the herds, etc., etc. That was their lifestyle. What a great life. All right. Yes, of course, there were some dangerous animals around, but, a great life. So why would they want to give that up to now all live in an urban environment where you probably all had to get up early in the morning? Everybody had jobs. Everybody was doing something specific. Your offspring would do exactly the same. Their offspring's offspring would do exactly the same. It was the beginning of, the urban life, which is still with us today. Why would you give up hunter-gathering to do this? And clearly, it's fear. It's fear that something bad is going to happen, or is going to happen again. So, you know, that's my way of looking at it.
Regarding the constellations, I mean, there's all this cosmic depictions at these sites, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and didn't they serve as like astronomical observatories? Tell us a little bit about that.
All over the world, people align their monuments towards celestial bodies. You know, whether it's the sun or the moon or the planets or the stars or the Milky Way. I mean, that's a very, very important one. I mean, it's been going on probably for at least 10,000 years and arguably more. And I mean, yeah, there are papers written to suggest that certain caves were chosen for cave art specifically because of their orientations towards, let's say, that the solstices or the equinoxes or a prominent celestial event. So it's been going on a long while. We have it at Karahan Tepe. We have it at Göbekli. Not only are there solar alignments there, but also there's very specific orientations towards stars, in particular one which is Deneb, the brightest star in the constellation of Cygnus. Cygnus is generally seen as a celestial bird, and that's universal. That's whether it's in the Americas, whether it's in the ancient world. The bird will always change, and the bird is usually associated with two things: the transmigration of the soul from this world to the next, or creation. It's a bird of creation. And you have these alignments at Göbekli Tepe towards Deneb, but it's not just Deneb they're looking at. That's simply marking what's behind Deneb. What's behind it is the northern opening of the dark rift of the Milky Way. And this was seen universally around the world as a point of entry into the sky world. The Maya, for instance, referred to it as the road to Zilbalba, which is a word that's generally interpreted as underworld, but it means otherworld or the afterlife, essentially. In Native American tradition, there is the so-called Path of Souls death journey. This is something that was adopted by at least 30 to 40 different tribes and would seem to have been archaic even at this time. It's there within the iconography of a lot of Native American art that goes back to the Mississippian period, the Adena period, whatever. And this is a journey of the soul, and it goes like this. When a person dies, or the soul of a shaman, they would make a leap of faith, firstly going to the constellation of Orion, in particular an object in it called Messier 42 or M42. And this would allow access onto the Milky Way. They would then go along the Milky Way, probably encountering various sky figures, which are described in myths, until eventually they come upon like a judge of the afterlife. And this will judge the soul, whether it's worthy, righteous, or not. And if it's worthy, it's allowed to continue on into the afterlife. If it's not, it will either be reincarnated or quite literally devoured by this creature that's synonymous with the stars of Scorpius. But the position of this judge, and usually it's a birdman in Native American tradition, but it can be other forms as well, is Cygnus. It is a birdman, and it's marked by the stars of Cygnus, Deneb in particular, because this is the point where the Milky Way splits in two. And it's there in Egyptian myth, it's in other myths around the world, and it's there seemingly at Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and also clearly amongst this whole post, Ice Age civilization. And I mean, they're the most famous of all of the pillars at Göbekli Tepe is Pillar 43. Now, most people, the first things they'll think about is the so-called man bags on it. And we'll come on to those. But the main feature on it is a huge, great vulture. Now, that vulture represents a psychopomp. A psychopomp is the soul carrier. It carries the soul from one world to the next. And on the arm of the vulture, it's that side, I think, you have this bull. This bull represents the head, thus the soul, of a human individual who's making the transition into the afterlife. Where's his body? It's at the base of the pillar, and it's headless. And it is actually on the back of another vulture. Clearly, that's being taken off somewhere as well. You know, probably as part of the excarnation or sky burial process, which we know was taking place at these sites during this early age. You know, I mean, if people don't know what sky burials are, just Google Tibet sky burial, and some very, very gruesome images will come up, because it's still taking place to this day on the Tibetan plateau. So this is what they would do. And it would seem that at some point a belief arose that when the vultures flew off after having digested the bodies of these individuals, that they would also be taking away the soul. So wherever the vultures went off to, they were taking the soul into the next life. This is why you've got the vulture there. The archaeologists accept this. I've been saying this for donkey's years now in various of my books. And if you overlay the night sky of 9600 BC over the pillar 43, you know, Cygnus is exactly matched with the vulture. There's a scorpion below it that exactly matches the position of Scorpius. And this circle above the wing of the vulture matches the position of what's known as the northern celestial pole. This is the turning point of the heavens. And in shamanic tradition, this was known as the hole in the sky. The hole in the sky. It was the hole that you went from this world into the afterlife. You can look this up in, let's say, Siberian shamanic tradition or Mongolian shamanic tradition. It's very, very important to their beliefs and practices. And there you have it, you know, on pillar 43. And then we'll come to the man bags. What are these? Now, some of my colleagues say, oh, it's obviously to carry around their drugs, you know, as they're walking about. No, in my opinion, it's got nothing to do with that, because you have these rectangular, you know, bags, if you like, the rectangular, 3 of those, and you have these handles, and the handles are not central, they're offset to one side. Clearly they're not handbags, obviously, because, you know, when you make a handbag with offset handles, they're something else. And in my opinion, they represent the 3 worlds, which is a universal principle that is still important to peoples of that region to this day. And it's certainly very important, let's say, in Vedic tradition amongst the peoples of the, you know, the Hindu faiths. It's there obviously in Native American tradition, and obviously it's there in other parts of the world in different forms. The idea that there's 3 different worlds. Now, the term world may not be the best way. I mean, realms is a better way of looking at it. You have our realm with its sky. Then you have a lower realm, which also has its own sky. You know, think in terms of something like the hollow earth, if you like. You know, that's it. That, you know, obviously when you see depictions of the hollow earth, it's got its own sky, right? And it's the same with the sky world. The sky world, or the afterlife, was also seen to be essentially similar to our world, but clearly a better place, or a perfect life, or whatever, you know. And all 3 of these worlds float within the cosmic ocean, and this is shown around the man bags on pillar 43 as these series of chevrons all above it, all the sides of it. And from the head of the vulture, you have these blocks going right the way across the water to the head of another bird, which is a wader bird. Now, the wader bird is a symbol of the sky world, because of these 3 man bags, each one has a little animal next to it, as if like that's its symbol. What we consider to be the sky world has got a wader bird, almost certainly a flamingo next to it. The middle one has got a leopard on it, representing the middle world, and the lower world man bag has got a toad or a frog next to it, and that is a universal symbol of the underworld, basically. So what all of this is telling us is that this is a mnemonic teaching device that would have been used for trainee priests or shamans or initiates or whatever, to tell them what happens when they get into an altered state. That's what you're going to encounter if you go into these other worlds. This is what you're going to encounter if you go to the sky world. This is what you encounter if you go into the underworld, and this is essentially the sky. And as I said, if you put the sky of 9600 BC over Pillar 43, it matches almost perfectly.
A couple things I want to go back to that you've hit on. So you believe this area of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe was the cradle of civilization. You write in your new book how even local legends talk about Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden and going, I believe, near Haran. So tell us a little bit about that. And then you also mentioned that you believe the actual builders of these sites, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, were of enormous size. And then you mentioned something that was just really interesting, how basically serpent-like priests at Karahan Tepe and allowing this cosmic snake to enter participants during these shamanic rituals, it would have been like similar to being possessed by other snake cults. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, let's start with that first. Well, I mean, obviously, I've tried to, formalize what I think might have been going on at Karahan. And of course, the only way that we can really gain any kind of idea is to look at contemporary shamanic activities or religious activities that there are records of, ethnographic records, and they include, for instance, the fact that in parts of the world, even to this day, there are snake cults where people invite a god in the form of a snake to enter inside them. I mean, for instance, the cult of Damballa in the voodoo traditions of Haiti, for instance, people, when they become possessed by Damballa, they will literally fall onto the ground and writhe around as snakes, and the god will speak through them. And the same happens in this religious festival in Thailand that I described there, where I can't remember the exact details of it at the moment, but basically, there's a religious festival where people, guys in the morning, will get these tattoos done of serpents with chymic scripts written on them, and these tattoos will be done with a mixture of obviously ink, but also cigarette ash, but also sometimes the venom of snakes. And then the proceedings start, and what eventually happens is that the snake god actually possesses individuals, and as happens in voodoo, they will fall on the ground and they will writhe around like snakes. And you've got stuff like this. Of course, you've got very similar things of people speaking tongues within certain very fundamental Christian groups, for instance, that also use snakes. And what's important is that if something like this was going on at Karahan Tepe, I think that it would have been like what was going on with the Oracle at Delphi, but in a much rawer, deeper level. And I think that, if we saw these people, we'd think they were completely mad. I mean, they'd be writhing around like snakes, and probably be covered in dirt and black paint and white paint and whatever. They would have looked like mad people, but not being funny. But that's what most true shamans should look like, in all honesty. But there was obviously a method in their madness, because these people had an incredible understanding of technology and innovation, and clearly they had understanding of the stars, the movement of the stars, of carving bedrock enclosures something which clearly is part of a tradition that went back probably thousands of years. I mean, you know, obviously my colleague Graham Hancock obviously looks for this lost civilization. That's obviously the rallying banner of this whole idea of a lost technology. But I mean, this is something which I think has probably developed very gradually across thousands of years. And here it is in full flight at Karahan in particular. I mean, Göbekli I take as something slightly different. I mean, to me, Göbekli is almost like a cathedral, you know, in the Catholic Church. You know, you go inside, there's a main altar and chancel and the rest of it, and then you have all these side chapels where you have the veneration of different saints and the Virgin Mary and whatever else. Yeah. Well, to me, Göbekli is like that. You know, you have so many different enclosures, some of them very small, that they're clearly places where probably a particular family group maybe or representatives of a clan would come every year to indulge in some kind of religious or shamanic activity, maybe healing, maybe dream incubation, stuff like this. Now, I think something similar was going on at Karahan, but it was much rawer. Whatever they were doing there, they had purpose. And, you know, to me, if Göbekli Tepe can be seen as a Catholic site, Karahan Tepe can be seen as a Gnostic site, a place where these people are trying to understand gnosis, knowledge, wisdom, and are trying to understand what we would call today ontological questions. You know, who are we? Where do we come from? What is out there? Is there a God? What happens after death? You know, and on top of this, they are gaining communications with an entity which they see as synonymous with the galactic bulge. Now, the galactic bulge, as I mentioned earlier, marks the center of our own Milky Way galaxy. And what do we have at the center of our own Milky Way galaxy but a supermassive black hole, which is referred to as Sagittarius A star. Now, Rupert Sheldrake, one of the great free thinkers of our time, actually has put forward a theory suggesting that our supermassive black hole, Sagittarius A star, could be an intelligent, thinking, living being in its own right. And that if that's the case, then it's almost like a sort of localized form of God, you know, that tends over its own creation. And its own creation is the matter that forms the star systems and, you know, everything else within our own galaxy. So in other words, that intelligence is something that could be influencing us in some unconscious, you know, quantum entangled way in some way. So is it possible that the people of Karahan Tepe really were communicating with a genuine entity that was associated with the very direction of focus? In other words, the galactic bulge, or was it just coincidence that they happened to be looking in that direction because it was a bright area of the sky? Obviously, we can't say, but I'd like to think that their intuition was connecting with something higher, some kind of higher consciousness, and that this was giving them information, or certainly triggering what we'd call downloads of information, which was helping their culture, their civilization to evolve and to become the first post-Ice Age civilization. Now we come on to the Garden of Eden. Now, as I mentioned before, the four rivers of paradise define where Eden was, and that is southeastern and eastern Turkey. And there are places, you know, in this territory that do claim to be the Garden of Eden. For instance, it's said that the Garden of Eden lies beneath the waters of Lake Van in eastern Turkey, where it has been since it was drowned at the time of the Great Flood of Noah, for instance. There was an Armenian monastery near the East Turkish city of Mush. I've been there. This is the whole story of this in my book, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods. And these people believed that they actually had a tree that was grown from the original tree of life in the Garden of Eden. And they would do special ceremonies relating to it. They would create this sacred oil that was used by the Armenian church, for all the prelates and the rest of it would be, bathed in this oil, whatever. I've been there, incredible story. But the most important of these stories comes from Shamanic itself. And this is right in the heart of these Taş Tepeler sites. In fact, there was a big Taş Tepeler site there. One of the products of which is Urfa Man, which is this incredible statue, and there's a picture of it right behind me. I might as well pick it up. This was actually found in Şanlıurfa. That's called Urfa Man. I mean, this is 6.5 feet tall, and it was just found during renovation work, but excavations revealed that it was part of a big series of enclosures right by what's known as the Pools of Abraham, which is where supposedly Abraham was born and brought up and came up against this tyrant called Nimrod. So this supposedly was the true Garden of Eden. The most ancient name for Şanlıurfa, which is known as Edessa in the Bible, is Adama. Adama means the place of Adam. And why it's called that is because, according to the local story that's still told to this day, I describe all this in the book. I mean, I heard these stories bit by bit across the years visiting Şanlıurfa, but it wasn't until somebody came up to me, a lady came up to me and a couple of Turkish friends of mine, and basically we were standing in the reproduction, the life-size reproduction of enclosure D at Göbekli Tepe. And this lady came up, and she in Turkish, and she was basically pointing towards them and said, do you think that these pillars are the pillars that were said to be in the first Kaaba, which was founded by Abraham, according to Islamic mystical tradition? I said, sorry, to tell us more, tell us more about the story. And she then recounted the whole story about Adam and Eve, and how that Şanlıurfa was Adama, and the place where Adam, the terrestrial paradise, and how they were kicked out of paradise and they went on to the nearby Haran plain. And I mean, obviously, the story that we know from the book of Genesis is that Adam and Eve are in the garden, living their life, and suddenly a serpent comes into the midst of them and says, why don't you eat of that tree over there, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? So they pick the fruit, which is a really interesting thing. I mean, our idea that this is a nice rosy red apple is completely false, because the actual word in Hebrew, and I can't remember at the moment, but the word in Hebrew that means fruit also means seed, and can mean a seed of wheat, basically. And in some traditions, particularly in Islamic tradition, the fruit is actually a stalk of wheat. So in other words, this is a metaphor for the creation of agriculture, which we know took place in this region. I mean, within sight of Göbekli Tepe. But anyway, so lest Adam and Eve eat of the other tree, the tree of life, and become immortal, God kicks them out. And they go on to the Haran plain, according to the local story. And here they have to till the land, and they have to find something to plant. And so Adam turns around to Eve and says, what are we going to plant? So she says, oh, what about this that I brought out of heaven? It just happens to be in my hand, and it's a stalk of wheat. Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. So they plant this wheat, and for the first several years, the yield is next to nothing, apparently. And it's the toiling the land is really difficult and the rest of it. But then a bull comes along, and they realize that they can use this bull for ploughing and whatever else, and the yield increases, and they'll have happily ever after until they die, presumably. But what's interesting is that this story says that to give thanks to the bull, you know, to allow them for the success of this agriculture, the growing of the wheat, they kissed the bull on the head or the forehead every year, you know, as part of some kind of ritual or ceremony. And you think, that's a bit odd, isn't it? Well, but then you realize what the bull is. The bull is not a physical bull, it's the earth itself. Because if you ask the peoples of southeastern or eastern Turkey what the bull, you know, about the bull, for instance, they will say that it's the earth itself, and that the horns of the bull hold up the heavens, and that every time that the bull shakes, you get earthquakes, you get volcanoes, you get thunderstorms. Yeah, that's what they say even to this day. I mean, I first learned this from the guide that we go with, you know, on our tours. And somehow it just came up in conversation. I said, what? I said, people still believe that now? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I then started asking around, and yeah, I mean, you know, lots of other people, particularly the Kurdish people of the region, you know, firmly believe that. And it starts to make sense of a lot of religious iconography of statues and things like this, of bulls and stuff like that, that you see in Şanlıurfa Archaeological Museum, which, by the way, is just an extraordinary, it's my favourite museum in the world. It's just got so much from Göbekli Tepe and Karahan and all these other, you know, Taş Tepeler sites. But so, okay, so that's it. Now, the agriculture part is quite easy because you know, this is a memory, I think, of the fact that wheat was domesticated and widely grown for the first time in this region. Okay, I mean, it's something like 60 different varieties of modern wheat that we use for everything from making bread to beer to cakes to pasta can be traced back genetically to a wild variety that grows to this day on the sides of an extinct volcano within sight of Göbekli Tepe, and just then you can see it just as well from Karahan, just up the road from Karahan as well. That's called Karahan. So that's fine. But what about the serpent? What is this serpent? And I think that this is a memory of this snake shamanism that was taking place at sites like Karahan Tepe, and that, you know, the idea of that serpent communicating with them is essentially this cosmic serpent coming into the people and, you know, and giving oracular pronouncements, basically. And what's interesting, of course, is that the serpent in the story of the Garden of Eden originally has arms and legs. And it's only when God turns to the serpent after he's beguiled, you know, Adam and Eve, that God says, right, that's it. You know, you're losing your arms and legs. So you're going to forever writhe around on the floor. So that's interesting. You know, the fact is that this snake had arms and legs. To me, we presumably are looking at a shaman here. You know, this is a snake shaman or a shamaness, you know, that are clearly in that form. And there's a lot of relationship, by the way, between the snake and Eve. I mean, the term Eve has the same root as snake as it has life, basically, you know, in Hebrew, Aramaic, Semitic languages. And it's almost like Eve herself is almost like a sort of personification in some way of that snake in the Garden of Eden. I mean, I go into this in detail in the new book, but weirdly enough, I talk about it in From the Ashes of Angels, which goes back to 1996. I mean, I go into huge detail about the snake cults relating to the early Neolithic of this region there. So this is nothing new, really.
This has been a great interview, Andrew. Let's close with one more question for you. You've been to Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe so many times. You've written all these books about these sites. Let's talk about this growing controversy surrounding what's going on at Göbekli Tepe. There's reports of concrete being poured over areas, orchards planted, What's
Right, let's
going on?
set the record straight, shall we? Okay, let's start with the trees. The trees are orchards of olive trees, and they were planted by the family that owns the land, owns Göbekli Tepe. They were planted around 2004 because they first appear on the maps the following year. And the reason that they planted them was to increase the value of the land, because if land has trees on it, as opposed to, let's say, just arable, ploughed land, it's worth as much as 10 times more than it is without those trees. So they deliberately did that to increase the value of their land, because they knew eventually they would have to sell that land to the archaeologists or the government. I mean, to be honest, it was a futile thing to do, because they were going to lose that land and get whatever the government paid them anyway. And even to this day, it's still going through the courts, about the ownership of the land, what monies go to who and whatever. So it's a very complicated matter, but that's there. It was not done for any malicious reason. The other important thing, people said, oh, those olive trees are destroying all the archaeology. Well, olive trees have very shallow roots that only go down a couple of feet, so they really are not going to destroy the archaeology. They might destroy something down to a couple of feet, but nothing really beyond that, in all honesty. Right, so that's the trees out of the way. The concrete, the only concrete that's actually on Göbekli Tepe itself, which is about 300 by 200 meters by 50 meters tall, is it 50? I can't remember now. Is that some concrete went into the ground when they were creating the pylons to hold up the roof? Yes, but that's the only, and obviously they excavated all of those areas first, down as far as they could get to the bedrock. So in theory, they didn't destroy any archaeology. I mean, yeah, all right, the archaeologists probably didn't like this idea, but it was going to happen anyway. So that's the only cement. The roads with the cement are nothing to do with the actual site itself. That's the approach road, and from the visitor centre there is wooden. Well, there's like a little access road, but that's always been there, that goes up to the site. But when you get to the site, there is a wooden walkway that takes you all the way round, and it hasn't got any concrete at all. So that's essentially false. The idea that they want to shut down excavations for 150 years, that's false. The truth of the matter is that, yes, archaeologists do like to set aside certain areas of a site, because they believe that the coming generations of archaeologists will have better techniques to be able to, to analyze and the rest of it, all the soil and pollen and other artifacts and, dating, etc., etc. That's fair enough. And the fact is that the excavations did stop at Göbekli Tepe for several years. Nothing took place whatsoever. And this was from probably about 2015 through to about 2022. Nothing happened. But then they started to relook at the areas of the enclosures that were already opened. Enclosure D was looked at last year. They're currently working on enclosure B again, clearing out whole areas that had previously been left, the way that they'd found them. Plus, I know that next year they're opening up a whole new area. I mean, brand new area of Göbekli Tepe. So, that's that. The World Economic Forum are now in control of Göbekli Tepe as part of their takeover of world population. Yes, that's not really right as well, because the company that invested and put all the money up to Göbekli Tepe was the Dogos Group, and they made all their money, all their billions, with oil, essentially. The family behind it is one of the richest families in the country, and they put, I can't remember how much it was, let's say 15, 20 million euros, I think it was, into creating the roofs. There are 2 roofs there, the walkways. They built the minibuses. They created the visitor centre, and yes, they are members of the World Economic Forum. But so is Coca-Cola. So is Google. I mean, you know, it's a case of so what, really, you know. And yes, a ice sculpture of Göbekli was it Göbekli Tepe, I think, was actually on display at one of the Davos meetings of the World Economic Forum a few years ago. Presumably this was part of the Davos group, you know, showing, hey, look what we're doing. So, you know, there's not a huge conspiracy to cover up stuff there. So, yeah, a lot of this is taken completely out of context. And the problem with all of this is that it's completely infuriating the archaeologists. And they tar all of us with the same brush. You know, even though I certainly, you know, have not been spreading rumours relating to these sites, you know, all the archaeologists, and bad things have been said about the archaeologists as well, quite publicly. But the only trouble is that they tar us all with the same brush, really. And, you know, that's making life more difficult for people like Hugh Newman and myself, you know, when we go out of these sites, because, you know, all we're there is fact finding, collecting information. Obviously, we want to take photographs, do videos or whatever. And it's becoming more and more difficult. Now, just to let your people know, next year, they're going to be putting a roof and a glass walkway through Karahan Tepe. And if it's anything like what they did at Göbekli Tepe, this is going to mean that the site will close for, I'm going to say, a minimum of a year. It may be less, I don't know. But, I mean, with Göbekli, I think it was closed for something like a year and a half. And I went there. I went to Göbekli Tepe in the middle of them putting the roofs up, and it was a mess. I mean, there were huge iron girders and stuff all over the place. Plant, you know, vehicles. It was just, you think, how the hell are they ever going to, you know, put this back together? But they did, and obviously, you know, they got the roof on it. So I'm going to imagine that something similar is going to go on at Karahan Tepe. So I'm going to say to people, look, if you want to go to Karahan, make sure you go before about August, September next year. Our next tour out there is next May. I say our, it's me, Hugh Newman, JJ Ainsworth, as part of the Megalithomania crew. I mean, you can find all the details of these tours on andrewcollins.com or on megalithomania.co.uk. And yeah, I mean, come with us. I mean, you know, they're voyages of discovery. You know, they're not just, you know, your average tour where you go and lie on the beach for half the week. I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, often we or the people with us make discoveries which will essentially go in the history books. So come along to those. But sorry, I've gone into the commercial side of things. But
no, that's great. Yeah, everybody go to I think you said andrewcollins.net, right?
No, andrewcollins.com.
andrewcollins.com to find information on this tour. Nobody better to go to a tour to see Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe than Andrew Collins and Hugh Newman and the gang. Also, Andrew, tell people where they can follow you on social media and how best they can purchase your new book.
Yeah, I mean, go to andrewcollins.com. All of the links to social media are on the opening page, the landing page there. And also, obviously, there's articles about all that we've been talking about here on there. There's links, obviously, to where you can get the new book, which is Karahan Tepe, Civilization of the Anunnaki and the Cosmic Origins of the
Serpent of Eden.
The Serpent of Eden, that's it. Yeah, you got it right. And you know, and obviously I've got lots of other wonderful books as well. I mean, check out From the Ashes of Angels if you've not read that. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you want to contact us, either do it through social media or you can contact me by email via the website. So, hope to hear from some of you.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you again so much for your time and just your insight on these incredible sites. I'm really excited about your new book. I'm hoping it becomes a next bestseller, and maybe we'll do a recap interview in the near future.
We will indeed. As I said, I'm just about to drop a major article all about Stonehenge's altar stone, which we now know comes from northeastern Scotland, and it's the search for its lost companion. So watch out for that, for the links for that over social media in the next couple of days as well.
Sounds good. So to everybody watching or listening, follow Andrew, buy his book, go on tour with him it's May of 2025, right?
Yep, that's the next one. We got one in September as well that mostly concentrates on the eastern part of the country, but we also go to Göbekli and Karahan and the other Taş Tepeler sites where we can. But as I said, we think work is going to start on Karahan Tepe around September next year. I mean, it could be booked back, but as I said, if you really want to go before that time, I would say.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much and best of luck.
Thank you very much.